This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. My guest today is Brett Steenbarger. Brett is a clinical associate professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at the State University in New York, Upstate Medical University in Syracuse, New York. He has written, I think he's working on his fourth book now. Tons of papers out there. He's got a great blog that you have to check out. Works also as a performance coach for hedge funds, proprietary trading firms. A really interesting guy. Definitely check out his blog. Hope you enjoy this conversation. Hey, Brett.
How you doing?
Good. Before I'm calling you today, I'm thinking to myself, have we spoken before? We've been communicating for probably a decade, but I couldn't recall if we had actually got on the phone before.
I don't think so. We obviously communicated about the book and, shared some things that way, but I think this is the first in-person communication.
Where am I reaching you this fine day?
I'm at home sitting at the island in my kitchen with surrounded by 4 cats.
I see a cat on your Skype screen as well.
Exactly, my avatar. Yes, that's one of our 4.
Well, nice. Well, I also have a problem today as I started preparing to speak with you, and I'm like, oh my gosh, there are way too many directions we could go. There are too many issues you could cover. Even if I go through your blog for 5 minutes, I'm like, oh my God, I'm just making bullet points. I'm like, okay, we can go here, we can go here. So anyways, just the audience knows that I think you're from a 360 degree perspective. We can go just about anywhere in the trading world today. And I have some ideas. And the first thing I wanted to jump into, and I think you could offer a nice explanation to what it is and why it's important, is the idea of a flow state. And I saw you describe it as the optimal balance between the challenges we face and our level of talent and skill, the flow state. I started to think about Michael Jordan and being in the zone and that type of thing. Was I thinking right? Was that where you were headed with that? Why don't you explain that, the flow state?
I think that is a good analogy. And being in the zone in general, I think, is what people mean when they talk about a flow state. The flow concept was popularized by a psychologist researcher, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, and he talked about states of consciousness in which people become fully and totally absorbed in what they are doing. They lose track of time, and during those states, he found not only do they feel most fulfilled, but they also report their most creative work. And he found in his studies that this state is most likely to occur when there is a match between the challenges of a task and the skill level of the individual, so that when we are challenged by something we enjoy doing, but not overwhelmed by it, we become fully absorbed. If we're insufficiently challenged, we become bored. If we're overly challenged, we become overwhelmed. And so he proposed that learning in any discipline is most likely to occur effectively if we can sustain a state of flow.
How have you seen this manifested in the trading world? What's a great example that might come to the tip of your brain right now that makes you say, this is a good example to kind of bring this idea and connect it to the trading world?
Well, one thing that you emphasized in your trend following book, Mike, was the idea of the importance of position sizing. And it's something that I find that many traders don't consider adequately. So, for instance, if a trader is taking too much risk on a trade for their ultimate level of emotional tolerance, then in fact they're creating a mismatch. The challenge of the P&L state overwhelms them, and so they can't remain in that flow state where they will optimally process market data. We're most likely to experience flow when we are not frustrated. And so if we set perfectionistic expectations that we won't experience whipsaws or we won't experience drawdowns, we set ourselves up for frustration that once again can nudge us out of that flow state.
Let me go into, you brought up risk, and let's talk about risk tolerance for a second. It's a topic, and so many people have come to me over the years and they want opinions on risk and how much to risk and this and that. If this is not how much you should risk in whatever trading approach you might be taking, of course, you can go too far to one side, and that's pretty easy a mathematical certitude as to where you're going. But when you start to risk those small amounts, it's such a personal choice. And I'm curious to your views about how you have maybe got people to see the idea of risk selection, risk tolerance, because it's not a one size fits all.
No, and there are two facets of risk management. One is the logical side, and one is the psychological side. And in a purely logical sense, you can determine for a given Sharpe ratio or expected Sharpe ratio what kind of risk you would need to take in order to generate a particular target return. So, like you say, that's a fairly structured determination. The question is, on the logical side of how much risk one, quote unquote, should take, is that how much risk a person psychologically can tolerate? And an equally important question for the people I work with is that a level of risk that investors are ultimately willing to tolerate?
Well, that's a whole nother can of worms right there. And I'll let you.
It's a huge can of worms, Mike.
Yeah.
There is a tremendous mandate among investors to make money and not lose money. And the world is not exactly constructed that way. And so what happens is that a level of risk-taking may be appropriate for achieving a particular target return, and may even fit with a person's psychological risk tolerance, but could fall outside of mandates of the owners of a firm, if it's a proprietary trading firm, or investors in the firm, and that can create conflict and problems. Many times I find that people are most able to manage capital effectively if their risk-taking is less than what might be optimal logically. That by minimizing drawdowns and containing them, they are able to maintain a psychological state closer to the flow state that works for them. And so many successful portfolio managers I've worked with are not high risk takers, but they end up being very consistent risk takers and achieve very good risk-adjusted returns.
Yeah, and I think it's tough, though. I think as we were bringing up the idea of investors, the no risk, no return, though, you have to put your foot outside the boat, so to speak. You can't just expect a return for not doing anything. Like, you've got to put some skin out there if you want some reward. And that's, I think, too many people, even astute institutional investors that maybe work with some of the largest, I'm thinking of some of the public pension funds that put a lot of money with assorted hedge funds around this world. I sometimes really wonder about their decision making and it seems to me, it looks like a political crapshoot in there, and often not the most astute investing decisions.
It can be political. It can be simply a function of cognitive bias. I think investors many times are attracted to recent returns. And so someone who's had a big year might be more likely to attract capital than someone who's had a more modest year, despite length of track record.
But we're also talking about, as we're just keeping this conversation going about institutional investors, these folks should be aware by now, for some of the largest funds out there in the world, where their alpha comes from. And so if you're looking at a broad section of markets and this particular trader has a fantastic year, it should not be such a surprise. I find in 2014 for astute institutional investors to still be moved by what have you done for me lately is kind of amazing. I'm just still shocked.
I would agree. And there's certainly more and less sophisticated investors. And again, this applies not just to quote unquote institutional investors, but really anyone who is allocating capital to someone for trading. So I see it happening within proprietary trading firms. I see it happening within hedge funds. I see it happening within CTAs. So I think there are many varieties of this, but it's very common to be drawn to eye-popping returns and overweight those and recent returns.
So I saw a quote on your site. I want to know why it was on there. It was in a list of quotations, famous people. Mario Andretti, if you have everything under control, you're not moving fast enough. I love it. I love it. What inspired you? What did you like about that?
Actually, that is, it's interesting you picked that up. That is one of my favorite quotes from the quotation selection from the blog recently. If you're not out of control, I mean, obviously, you can't be completely out of control in your trading and in your risk taking. However, we don't grow as people if we stay within our comfort zones. We have to push the envelope to some degree to expand our boundaries, to expand ourselves. And so I always want to be pushing, moving harder, moving faster, doing more, and pursuing opportunities that are uncertain, because those are the ones I find that lead to the greatest personal payoffs. If I'm feeling completely comfortable, completely in control in my personal life, then I probably am relatively stagnant.
How would you advise a client that maybe you see this in their behavior? They think they're still progressing, but they're too under control. They've almost lost that edge a little. How have you advised? How do you get people to kind of come around and maybe see that they might be stuck a little?
Yes, well, it gets back to that principle of what psychologists do, and that is comforting the afflicted and afflicting the comfortable. And I think there is an important role for afflicting the comfortable, that things are going well, and it's easy to take the eye off of the performance ball. And so what I will look for are occasions where, even within that comfort zone, a trader or a portfolio manager might be missing opportunities, might be performing suboptimally, and bring that to their attention. I act as a kind of mirror to the trader, and I hold that up in front of the trader. Take a look. Most of the professional traders I work with have enough of a competitive makeup and mindset that if you nudge them, if you put them in front of that mirror and help them show them that they are missing opportunities, that they are performing suboptimally, they often will pick up on that. But it takes that mirroring, it takes that nudge.
Do you find also, even for traders, and you've worked with significant traders in your career, significant achievement, do you find some traders, even though they might hire you and bring you in, and they want the straight talk, they don't want the airbrushed pretty pictures, do some of them still push back? Do some of them get to the point where they don't like that mirror?
Oh my goodness, yes. And I would go even further. There are some who really want the trading coach to augment or support their own confirmation bias. And so they don't want to hear what's uncomfortable. They want to, they're really looking for more of a cheerleader than a coach. And that becomes difficult. And there have been occasions where I've had to turn down coaching assignments simply because what the person was asking for would have required less than full integrity on my part.
Yeah, that I could see how that could happen for sure. Hey, interesting thought here. So I often see percentages. It'll say, well, 95% of traders lose, or entry is only 10% of the success, or often I will see this, that a very high percentage of trading comes down to the psychological component, 80, 90%. How do you see that when you start to see those percentages tossed around? What immediately comes to mind for you?
Well, what comes to mind is the distinction between what is necessary and what is sufficient. And I do believe that having a focused and disciplined mindset is necessary for trading success. I don't think it's sufficient. If discipline were all that were needed, or if a relatively emotionless mind state were all that were needed to succeed in trading, then probably there would never be any losing algorithmic trading systems. The computer doesn't have the emotions, and they execute flawlessly and in a disciplined fashion. And yet we all know that those can be overfit and not perform. So it takes focus, it takes discipline, but it takes something more, and that's commonly referred to as an edge in markets. You have to be trading patterns and concepts that reflect a true and objective positive expected return. And the idea that psychology is 90% of trading, maybe that's true once you have that objective edge. But it takes that objective edge in order to succeed.
So I was looking at that. I think I first saw it in a PDF from Michael Mauboussin, who used to be at Legg Mason, and it was a process versus outcome chart. And basically, a good process, good outcome is deserved. A good process, bad outcome is a bad break. A bad process and a good outcome is dumb luck, and a bad process and a bad outcome is poetic justice. Process versus outcome. I think there's so many folks, and we've already kind of talked about this a little bit without naming process versus outcome in the beginning of our conversation, but so many people are fixated on that outcome. They just love that outcome. That outcome looks so pretty to them. But boy, that process just gets lost in the shuffle, doesn't it?
Yes, and what happens during slump periods, we all know that there are going to be occasions, even with that edge, where there are a series of losing trades or there is a losing period in markets. People will begin to doubt themselves, doubt their methods, and will make random changes in their processes. And so the drawdown turns into a slump. It's like the baseball hitter who strikes out again, begins to doubt themselves, and now changes their swing and proceeds to have several games of poor performance. So I think it is important to distinguish between process and outcome, and to be able to accept that at times there will be frustrating outcomes from very good processes, that we're not guaranteed success. Drawdowns are inevitable. As you emphasize in the book, I remember Ed Sakota talking about you can't repeal uncertainty from market outcomes. By accepting that and focusing on process, we can stay as true to whatever edge we have in markets as possible.
I've seen this over the years, and I don't know if you share the same perspective, but in speaking with so many different fund managers over the years, it sure seems like strategy is driven. Now, of course, in my world, I've seen many guys and ladies that have done very well as trend following traders. and then the clients come to them, they see those results and they want a part of it, that still doesn't make it easy for people to accept what goes along with that style of trading. But I think the biggest thing that I've heard in conversations over the years is clients and the in and out of flow of money really keeps even some of the best traders on edge. And frankly, the word that I want to use is worried.
Yes.
It's like, because I think they see those, that it all comes down to, and I'm not saying this in a negative way, because there's many men and women that you and I respect who have made fantastic fortunes and made their clients lots of money with 2 and 20 type fee structures. But those fee structures carry a psychological burden, don't they?
They certainly can. And worry is really a two-edged sword. I've seen worry work in the favor of a trader in terms of keeping them prudent about risk management. And I've seen, and act as a brake on overconfidence biases. And I've seen worry act as one of those frustrations that take people out of the zone, out of that flow state. And it becomes particularly challenging when the worries of investors end up becoming the worries of trading firms and money managers.
Yeah, that defeats the whole purpose of why the investor actually wanted the expertise of that trader to begin with.
Yes, and I think your point is well taken, that it's one thing to intellectually accept a degree of uncertainty and potential drawdown from trading. It's another thing emotionally to accept that and to be in that drawdown state and be able to stick with a sound process.
Yeah. Okay, Brett, let me go trading 101 on you. Common characteristics of traders. What are some of those common characteristics that you've seen in your career, and just kind of laying out some nuts and bolts for the audience?
Common characteristics of successful traders. I would make important distinctions between short-term traders, and most notably day traders, and longer-term traders, most notably investors. There is a very worthwhile book that I'm sure you're aware of, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. And my experience is that Kahneman's ideas are important, that there's a large distinction, important distinction, a vital distinction between slow thinking, deep thinking, and fast thinking, quick pattern recognition. The shorter the time frame of the market participant, the more I see fast thinking and quick pattern recognition as essential to success. The more I see longer time frames and investing as important to the trader, the more I see the slow thinking, the deep thinking, the explicit analysis as important to success. And of course, there are hybrids, and there are people who I've known and worked with who have skills on both sides of that. But I think there are important skill differences between the short-term trader and the longer-term market participant. That being said, I do find some personality commonalities. One of the personality traits that is emphasized in your book and in the Big Five research, as it's called, is conscientiousness. Conscientiousness is attentiveness to detail, process orientation, if you will, a sense of responsibility, and people who are high in conscientiousness, who are detail-oriented, who are very focused on responsibility, end up being more reliable followers of a particular edge or a particular system than people who are low in conscientiousness, who can be impulsive. Another dimension that ends up being relatively important is emotional stability. or sometimes the opposite, called neuroticism. People who are relatively steady in their emotional makeup versus people who have lots of emotional ups and downs. And it's easiest to make decisions under conditions of risk and uncertainty if your flight and fight responses aren't roiling. And what I found is that either successful traders have this emotionally steady, stable makeup, or they find some mechanisms to provide them with a high degree of conscientiousness so that they can be very detail-oriented and responsible. If they don't have their feet on the ground, if they aren't grounded in a state where they are relatively steady emotionally and relatively reliable in their performance, they often don't follow whatever talents or skills they may have with consistency. And that brings me to the last characteristic, and that is underscoring one of the findings from Jack Schwager's research. And that is that successful money managers are very different from one another in their personalities and in their trading styles. But we most often find that the successful money managers are trading in a fashion that is consistent with their personality strengths. They have some area of strength that they find a way to manifest, to express through their trading. And so the person who is quantitatively oriented and analytically skilled might have very different strengths than the person who has that fast thinking pattern recognition. But each finds a way through their trading to be who they are in terms of those strengths.
Kind of an outside the box type question. And given your background and given the epidemic overuse and misuse of prescription drugs related to the mind, where are we headed in that place? It sure seems like that we've passed the threshold of those people that truly need medical help, and we're at a point where a lot of issues of the mind are being treated pharmaceutically. Are we in a good place in society?
Well, it's a really, really good question. As you know, I have an adjunct clinical faculty appointment at the medical school in Syracuse, New York, in the Department of Psychiatry. I'm a psychologist, a clinical psychologist myself by training, but work closely with my colleagues in the department in psychiatry. And I've really seen both sides of that issue. I've seen people with lifelong debilitating depression or anxiety disorders benefit tremendously from the appropriate medications. It really has turned their lives around. And I've seen people who have been overly quick to turn to pharmaceutical solutions when in fact other ways of dealing with behavioral problems, let's say in children, could be found. And there are habit-forming medications that can be quite dangerous that end up being prescribed. I've seen this with the minor tranquilizers, the benzodiazepines, that people will take to calm themselves down or help themselves sleep. And on a very temporary basis, they can work, but used to excess over time, they create a very dangerous dependence.
Yeah. Hey, one more quote that I saw on your site that I love from Bob Knight. And here you are putting Bob Knight. A lot of people say you can't quote Bob Knight. Come on, Bob Knight. Your biggest opponent isn't the other guy. It's human nature. I love it.
Love it. Love it. And I am a Bob Knight fan. I admit it publicly and proudly. We all have our moments and we have our flaws. But, what I think Coach Knight really exemplified was the importance of teaching as a coach and the importance of preparation, the drive to not just win, but to prepare to win. And human nature is such that we like to avoid effort. We like comfort. And as I was mentioning before, we don't really grow. We don't expand, certainly not as a basketball player, unless we push our limits. And so human nature keeps us out of the gym. It keeps us away from practice. It keeps us from researching markets and from developing fresh sources of edge. And that's something that's important to push past.
It was kind of comparing the idea or contrasting or just getting people to think about two different strategies of trading, which is trend trading versus a mean reversion. And the floor is yours. Where did you want to go with that?
Well, it's really interesting because, to get back to our earlier point, many times traders and trading firms and investors have trouble tolerating drawdown. And so even though they may end up conceptualizing a macro market in terms of trend, they find themselves unable to fully participate in that trend and trade with that trend because the trend always involves some degree of retracement. And so what happens, ironically, is that people who will talk in terms of trend and think of their trades in terms of trend will end up trading in a way that looks more mean reverting, so to speak. And as a result, their participation in any trend that manifests is suboptimal. One of the cornerstones of just my own thinking about markets is a philosophical tradition called contextualism. Contextualism emphasizes that events are the result of context, of situations that we are in. And there are situations in markets that lead to more directional persistence, and there are situations in markets that lead to less persistence of direction. And we call those situations regimes. There are stable market periods in which patterns within markets will persist and then change with changing economic conditions, changing social conditions, and so forth. And so I like to think of trend not only in terms of price movement, but trend in terms of regime persistence. That a regime that we are in currently, if we identify a stable, real regime, that in the short run tends to persist. Now that persistence of regime may or may not implicate directional persistence of price movement. You could have a mean reverting pattern that is part of a stable regime that itself will persist over time. And so the trend that you're trading in that situation is not trend of price movement, but trend of regime, if that makes sense. So from my perspective, trend following is a broader concept, a more encompassing concept, and a more important concept than simply whether markets will go up or down day after day after day.
Yeah, and I think you are perhaps inadvertently bringing up an even more important issue, which is definitions in the quote trading and market space. And I think maybe you and I should start this. We should find a URL and just call this is the agreed upon definitions. I don't think it would ever happen. But I mean, there's so many terms get tossed around with different meanings. And one of the ones that I've seen recently that's hotly debated is trend following and momentum trading. getting put into the same camp. And now I'm having to go read some of those momentum papers to see exactly what they're talking about. So there's just a terrible amount of, I think we all want to be on the same page. We're not all trying to use different terms to confuse each other. But I think there is a heck of a lot of confusion out there.
Yes. And a hell of a lot of emotional attachment to terms like momentum or terms like value. And the discussions end up being more ones of ideological affiliation than real understanding.
Yeah, it's true. This is true. Well, I mean, somebody could criticize my world and say you do that for trend following. What I have tried to do, though, is find particular traders that often weren't associated with each other, trading in similar ways, making and lose money in the same months, which I thought was terribly unique data to have and to analyze. I think sometimes with bigger terms like value, you could say, well, Warren Buffett is a value trader and Seth Klarman, but these guys don't behave necessarily the same way. So it's a little bit trickier with some of the broader terms, I think.
Well, you're raising a great point, Mike, and that is that how people actually behave and how they describe their behavior can be very, very different things. And that's the bedevilment of every psychologist.
Yeah.
That when you really investigate what people do, this is true in the psychotherapy research. When you look at what people do as opposed to what they say they do, you see some very important differences. There's a whole tradition in psychotherapy called an integration perspective, in which they look at what the common characteristics are of good therapies. So if you look at successful therapists, what are they doing in common? Even though some might say they're a behaviorist and some might say they're a Freudian and some might say they're a humanist, what are they doing similarly that might account for their positive outcomes? And it turns out there are common effective ingredients of therapies. And I suspect, as you're alluding, that that's true for trading as well.
Yeah, I've seen people that want to describe themselves as in certain terms, and they're very honest and accurate. And then other traders that just don't want to use the term that would best describe them. And I often just figure it's for client purposes or marketing purposes because it's clear they're doing what they say they're not doing.
Right.
Yeah. Hey, Brett, where's the best place for people to check you out, follow along? You've got some really cool posts, motivational type things also as well on your blog. Where's the best place for people to go beyond Amazon where they can buy books? And you are working on the 4th book. Is that? Yes,
working on the 4th book, also with Wiley. But the Trader Feed blog, TraderFeed, traderfeed.blogspot.com, is really where I post day-to-day ideas and share and use as a kind of sketch pad for the ideas that end up going into the books that I write.
Yeah, I think for guys like me and you that have been online for a long time, we do something similar to that. I call Facebook and Twitter my own personal diaries. I don't necessarily even care that other people like it or whatever. It's whatever interests me and how I want to keep track of things, and that's how I use it.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up. One of the areas of research that fascinates me is creativity and the role of creativity in successful trading. And the thinking aloud process, talking aloud, writing, thinking aloud, processing information explicitly, and then reading over or listening to what you have said ends up being one of the techniques that can lead to fresh perspectives and creative outcomes.
Yeah, I feel fortunate to have started this podcast 2 years in and several hundred episodes, and I'm lucky in talking to you and so many other people that have come on. It's like going to a never-ending school with very, very bright people. It's quite fun.
Yeah, it's fun, and it's a tremendous resource that you've assembled. And there are some really top people there, over 230 podcasts I noticed. And think of each podcast as a kind of prism. You're putting on a different set of lenses, so to speak, so that you're seeing the world from a different angle. And eventually, with enough good people giving you enough good lenses, you start to see some fresh angles, some fresh directions. That's what leads to those creative insights and promising directions in trading or in other areas of life.
Yeah, I think you're spot on about that. I think you're spot on. Getting fresh perspectives and different perspectives, not just necessarily the same voices, and listening to different people say it, maybe a common or even a dissimilar. Just listening to different people explain themselves, their cadence, their tone. I mean, I'm still the same guy, but I get to hear all these different ways. It's fascinating. I love it.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Hey, Brett, listen, hopefully we can talk again in the future, and thank you for coming on today. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it, and good luck in your future podcasts.
Thanks, sir. Talk soon.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.